Windsor here, and welcome back to the Groove Guru podcast. And in this one, I want to share a recent conversation I had with a dear friend and colleague, Christian McNeill, on her podcast, Three Principles Conversations. And we explore an understanding that's had a profound impact in my life and one that I've touched on in many Groove Guru podcast episodes, and that's around resilience, clarity, and how life actually works beneath the noise of our thinking. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too.
Well, hello, and welcome to Three Principles Conversations with me, Christian McNeill. This podcast is about the Three Principles paradigm, and today I am joined with the wonderful Windsor McGilvray as a guest. And Windsor is a professional musician, an educator, and a coach currently based in Surrey, UK. He is also Scottish. He also hosts the Groove Guru podcast, exploring creativity, performance, and the deeper principles of how our mind shapes our experience so that we can live with less stress, more joy, and perform at our best. Well, thank you for that, Windsor, and thank you very much for making the time to join me today in this conversation. As we were discussing before the recording started, you were in fact inspirational in inspiring me and giving me the confidence to start this idea. Shortly after we first met at a Three Principles event, I think 2 years ago, was it? Something like that. Something like that. Yeah. hmm Last year, was it? Yes, I can remember being in a room where I couldn't see you, but I could hear another Scottish voice that I didn't recognise. It was someone I didn't already know. The event was in London, and then I worked out who you were, and I saw the red hair, reminiscent of my own son's hair, and we struck up a conversation, and it's been lovely to get to know you a bit since that time. Anyway, let's turn to you, Windsor, and tell anybody listening who you are. Tell us a bit more about you, where you hail from, what has informed your worldview, and how you came across this thing called the Three Principles.
Sure. So my name is Windsor. I grew up in Scotland, central Scotland, between Glasgow and Edinburgh, and the main passion that fueled what um, the main first chapter of my life would be drumming and music. And to cut a long story short, when I began a career working as a professional musician, I worked with a variety of bands and artists. It was like Hugh Cornwell from the Stranglers, who I'm still working with, and Wishbone Ash, etc. I was doing that, and whilst on the surface and getting some success, behind the scenes, I was struggling a bit. I had quite a bit of anxiety, and there was depression, and there was a lack of contentment under the surface that was just humming along. And as a result, I was always looking for something to, fix that essentially. So, I tried many different things along the way of doing that. Like, there's medication, there was therapy, there was CBT, CBD, hypnosis, biohacking, magic, and all of this stuff. And on the surface, that seemed to help while it did. But a real turning point, and which brings us to the heart of this conversation, was when I came across the understanding known as the Three Principles and Sydney Banks. And it was actually at a training that I was at, seeking to fix myself. Someone recommended the work of Sydney Banks, and I went to a training based on the teachings of Sydney Banks. He'd passed at that point, and I listened. There was a video of him speaking where he was saying everyone is sitting in the middle of mental health, but they don't see it because their own mind has led them astray. And it was that moment, and at that time there was a real profound shift in feeling, which was much more clarity and peace of mind than I could ever remember feeling. And that really, really landed in a way that, wow, I didn't really have words to articulate it at the time, and that's the thing about this understanding that we can get to, is that we can really be touched profoundly by it, but it can take a little while to explain what happens. But sometimes, if you explain it too much, the words can take you away from it. But keeping it simple, you know, as a result, I really, in essence, I learned that, in contrast to all the seeking and trying to fix myself that I was doing, that I didn't need fixing, because at core I wasn't broken. There was a perfect core of well-being there, and when that really landed, I became much happier. There was much less efforting and trying to make a thing and trying to like grapple this thing called thought so tightly. And simple changes, I experienced much more clarity, much more fun, much more creativity, and also became a much better listener, which is really at the heart of this conversation, that helps in everything from relationships to, very practically, showing up and playing music as well. And yeah, it's just a beautiful experience to continually live in, and I'm very grateful for it.
Hmm. Well, thank you. And you may have told me some of that that experience before, but I don't think I'd realised just how similar our paths to discovering this were. I was on on what I thought was an NLP training about expanding an NLP practice, and in fact, it was all about the principles, and it just hit me like a train, that I also had spent many years kind of seeking the holy grail of mental well-being and peace and serenity, and it had always eluded me, strange to relate. And then suddenly something hit me that was just enormously helpful. I knew I'd kind of found what I'd been looking for, and I knew that the search had stopped. I mean, so I've continued to be very interested in learning more and going deeper with the principles, but there isn't that sense of searching anymore. So it's been a phenomenal thing. And what you said, it is a challenge to speak about, to explain what this is, because we're pointing to formless laws or truths or true principles, in the sense that gravity is a principle and magnetism is a principle. But they're quite difficult to speak about, or it's a challenge to speak about. But I do think it's incumbent on practitioners to get better at that. I think there can be a bit of a temptation to say, "Oh, it's just too hard." Just don't think about it, and then it can become very kind of woolly, or all you need is love. And and I think that at its heart, there's something much more specific at play here. And one of my reasons for doing this podcast is to do my little bit to make it more widely known, and to endeavour to get clearer and more articulate about what's on offer, and why it might be of interest to people to take a look at this, or work with somebody, or follow up some of the free or very inexpensive resources that are available, to help themselves.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say that, because to communicate and have a conversation, we do need to use words and labels and descriptions. Though that's something that can get in the way, because we look to the words. Oh, he said, Windsor said, Christian said, fill in the blank said. That must be it. But it really is beyond that. So one thing I would invite any listener to do is, listen like you're listening to a piece of music or something in the background. It's a relaxed, non-trying sense of listening. Like the quick example was, I was playing Glastonbury Festival recently, and which was a lot of fun. And but like a lot of festivals, as a musician, you don't always get the chance to set up the stage and sound check and check all the fine tuning of things with as much time as you would if you're doing a normal concert. So when I was playing Glastonbury recently, the monitor system, like how I could hear the other musicians on stage, that wasn't really at its best. It wasn't. I basically couldn't hear the other musicians as clearly, and at first I would, try to listen to them and try to hear what Hugh was playing on guitar and Pat on bass, and though it was when I realised that trying is the thing that gets in the way of actual listening. That if I dropped the trying, if I dropped the noise, and just became present, then I could hear much more clearly, and I didn't really need the monitors. So it's that living with less on our mind is what's really at the core of this. And again, it's something that it doesn't come from me saying that. It's what you hear or anyone hears, just that sense of relaxed openness. And relating that to the word, if we are talking about three principles, then we can't really talk about three principles without speaking about Sydney Banks, who I'm sure many of you listening to this podcast will have heard of Sydney Banks. And the three principles, that's the words and the language that Sydney used to articulate the experience and what he learned. Because Cliff Notes version, Sydney Banks was a welder with a ninth grade schooling or education, had a lot of anxiety throughout his life, and basically wanted a better relationship with his wife. And at that time in the 70s, he went to it's like a couples retreat to have a better relationship. And in the course of that weekend, he had a huge insight that one of the psychologists there essentially was asking Sid how he was doing, and Sid would say, I'm just not getting this, words to that effect, I'm just so insecure. And the psychologist said, you're not insecure, you just think you are. And when Sid heard that, he just heard that in much deeper than I think the psychologist had intended. But again, keeping this simple, what I see is really helpful about this understanding is looking to those discoveries that Sydney Banks made, which, as I see it, are two of the most helpful things psychologically that we can learn in life, which is at the heart of what I've learned, and also when the people that I work with, they find this hugely helpful, which is essentially, one, where does our experience of life come from? There's that. And then also it's a sense of who we truly are at core. And when Sid had that experience, or this is my understanding of it, that he saw that essentially he was creating all of his insecurity, and that he often uses the phrase, it's all thought. It relates to something that my father used to say to me around the time when my mother passed away a few years ago, and I was suffering quite a bit. And he would say, you're doing it to yourself. Now, that might have felt a bit harsh to me at the time, but reflecting on it, it was so on point. And what I came to see was that any mental suffering that I would create, it was me doing that. Because when I got a bit clearer, I would notice that I would be in a calm, clear, relaxed feeling, and then I would start to think about something and get in a bit of a state. But then what happened was when I saw that, oh, it's me that's doing that, me that's creating my experience, not something in the outside world, there was a freedom in that, because I could see that if I'm creating my mental suffering, or a lack of clarity is another way of saying it, and that I saw that I could let that go, then as a result, my head just cleared, and I was back in that feeling of clarity and well-being that's always present. And it's like, with going back to the Sid story, so when he realized that, as I understand it, that allowed him to drop a lot of the unhelpful, insecure thinking and thought and feeling,
And
and have so
beliefs.
much. Yeah, absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely, and have so much less on his mind. And then naturally that dovetails into that second key teaching, which I see is really huge in this understanding, that is once we start to drop a lot of the thinking that's not helpful, that's unclear, and our head clears, naturally we come, very simply, we come into the now with nothing on our mind, and that space, that presence, is who we really are under all the noise of our thought system. And the thing is, it's like that's when some people call that the principles. That's what the principles is, who we really are. Yeah, and there's loads of words. Some people, as you said, some people say it's love. Some people call that God. Some people call that, you know, true self. But what that we're looking for at core is it's a state of presence that there's no words to describe.
Yeah, I wonder if I see it slightly differently, because I also start with, if I'm working with someone, and it's very much the way I see it in terms of my own life, and that that there is just that we have available to us at all the time just an extraordinary wellspring of power, creativity, love, really every good thing. And to my mind, it's always there. And I don't think it's contingent on us having a clear mind, even. It can come through at any moment. And the reason I say that, I'm a bit of a contrarian in some ways, but the reason I say that is that I already knew that. Before I stumbled across the principles through my experience in the whole world of recovery from addiction, and I've seen thousands of people either, have or describe having had a moment of clarity, a massive change, a massive insight, an epiphany that literally removes the need to continue drinking or drugging or whatever, and completely, despite them having to try to, do that or moderate it for years, often, usually without any success. And often those moments of epiphany occur when the person's an extremist, completely caught up in their thinking and their gloom and doom, and so um, I don't think that the experience of who we really are, or the resources that produces, is available, and the resources that are available to us is contingent on anything. I think can come through in the busiest of moments. In a crisis, and I find that comforting. It's just always there, and I did not know how to tune into that and on a consistent basis until I came across this work. But as you just touched on there when you were talking about the period, where you were grieving your mum, I was running a seminar with my colleague Mavis Carn earlier this year, and she said just a great thing. It's one of those things that just came out of her mouth, not rehearsed or anything. And she said, everything that seemed to go wrong in my life in the past was because I didn't know what I know now. And what she meant was not that she now had a sort of magical life where nothing ever happened. There were nobody died, nobody got ill. There was no accidents. It wasn't that. But what she was referring to was exactly the thing that you just referenced, that our capacity and our tendency, and even you were even kind of encouraged and conditioned in our culture to really make the most of stuff going wrong in a very, innocently. But and I saw, just sometimes you hear a thing that somebody says and the truth of it really hits you, but it was afterwards I had to really think about it and unpack, and I thought, yes, true for me too. My biggest time of crisis, and when I became a single parent, and everything kind of went wrong in many regards, and across different areas of my life, and I was floored by it, really floored by it. But today I see it wasn't that was nothing or unimportant, but I was innocently just running kind of script after script about how terrible my future was going to be and how terrible things for my children would be. And it was all nonsense. A, none of it came to pass, but B, didn't exist anywhere except in my mind. It didn't. The future does not exist, and that creation was all I was doing was terrifying myself on the basis of a fantasy albeit completely innocently. But I thought I was being sensible and prudent planning and being realistic and all of this sort of stuff. But to come back to that thing, really, I completely agree with her that so much pain in the past was simply because I was ignorant of where my experience was being created.
Yeah, and as I see that, it's and me too, without a doubt. And it wasn't until having more of that, you could say, self awareness that it's me creating my experience. It's not coming from out there. It's me thinking this up, which is really cool because it's that freedom that if I'm doing that to myself and creating one of those experiences that's not helpful, a lot of noise in the system, worry, anxiety, then uncreating that is a huge relief. And it opens up that our mental bandwidth. And the thing that relates that I resonate with when it comes to, you could say, things like addiction or looking to feel better, it's when we don't see that our experience is coming from within us 100% of the time. Ultimately, in a way, what we want is to feel better, to feel good, to feel peace and feel clear. But it's seeing that feeling of clarity, that what which we seek, is an internal experience, that it's created internally, and that it doesn't come from anything on the outside world. But we think, oh, if I have that certain thing, if I have more money, that relationship, this kind of physique, or you fill in the blank, then I'll feel better. And you can find temporary relief, but it's not contingent on external conditions.
The
And it's
temporary relief comes because you've stopped thinking about your problems.
yeah, absolutely. But we don't see that. It's like, for example,
Mhm.
when I would have, when I would drink a little bit, and I would. What I realized when it landed was, if I was having a drink of something, that the real relief sometimes it would come before I ever had a drink, even just thinking about it. Ah, okay.
Absolutely.
And then even if
Everybody.
yeah, and even if I had a drink, the thing that really uh, landed was, it was, even if I had a sip or whatever, it, the magic of the moment or the relief or the beautiful feeling was in the space. So the words that came to me, what I'm looking for is the space, not the substance. And what and it's when we see the things that we look for, and it can be anything, any seeking, looking for any external condition. Now, I'm not saying don't go and seek change and do different and do things in the world. That's not at all. I'm all for creating things and doing things. But when we see that we don't need stuff and circumstantial change to feel different in the inside, or orient ourselves from a beautiful space of clarity, then that's a game changer. Because for me, so many things I was doing to quote unquote feel better or fix myself just fell away. Like, okay, I could go and use this technique if I'm feeling anxious, or I could do fasting, or I could do, whatever it is. It's when I see that, well, I don't need the externals to change the internal, because I'm always creating the experience from the inside out, and I already have what I seek. And as a result, so many things that I would do to try and get to there just fell away because they didn't make any sense anymore.
Yeah, yeah. There is something that I think is it, takes some time. Well, it doesn't always take time, but there's a bit of a sort of paradigm shift, because we talk about we're creating it from within, but we're not creating it in a conscious way. I think that 90% of our thought is occurring unconsciously, which is why it seems as though it's coming at us from the world. So I think that often that's a point that I have noticed people kind of get stuck on. They have some sort of idea that if you understand the principles, you will have a sort of a tool to feel better at all times. And that's not been my experience at all. And indeed, one of the first things that was so liberating for me was that, and this is not a principle, but it was pointed out that we all kind of go up and down and up and down and up and down, in and out of thought all the time. And that is unlikely to change. And that was tremendously liberating, because it just what did change is that one doesn't need to take one's thinking so seriously. It's not data. I mean, there can be a recognition that, oh, I'm sort of caught up in it at the moment. But the good thing is that no matter what, the only thing I'm ever up against really is my own thinking, because the potential exists for that to clear, and then I'm able to see whatever challenges life is presenting with with an uncluttered mind, with wisdom, with resilience, with creativity. And that alone is enormous. It's enormous. But I don't need to try and change the world first before I can feel better. Feeling better will be coming along soon anyway. So,
Yeah,
mm.
and that's beautiful. And just the past few days, I was reflecting on that. It's, we all want to feel better, and we can even look to the three principles as, oh, this is another thing I can do to fix myself. I will three principles myself, but it's a description of how it works, of how well and perfectly we're made, especially psychologically. And when it comes to feeling better, something that I've been reflecting on is it's not necessarily about wanting to feel better and bliss and happiness, but just learning to actually feel better and realizing that it's safe to feel any experience that I have, any feeling. Because, like you're saying, it's like a lot of I don't think anyone is going to freak themselves out in their own head willingly, but it's like that thing, we're not in control of what pops into our head, because a simple way of talking about the principles is if we think it, we feel it. So whatever we think, it feels real. We feel it via our senses, and it looks real, like the outside world. It looks like the outside world, but that's not true. It's we're creating that, and seeing that, okay, I don't know what I'm going to think next, and I can't control that. I can't control that I'm going to feel anything that I think, and that's all always going on. So we're naturally going to have ups and downs, and just seeing that that's part of the design. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us. And what it can point to is that, again, it's not just about realizing this is an intellectual idea. It's about what we see that's helpful for us, and that certain states of mind, like when you were talking about a lot of noise in head, a real simple metaphor that I love about the principles and how the mind works is like a snow globe. Like if we're trying to focus on our problems, and most people do that because we think, okay, if I've got a problem and I'm worrying and it feels really intense, that feels like a really big problem. So I really need to roll up my sleeves to fix it. And that's what leads to getting caught up in spinning your wheels. But it goes back to that. There's a cool example, or attributed to Albert Einstein, that he talks about our problems are not solved at the same level of consciousness that we create them. So if we're in a state of mind that's here, one that's less clear, then the answer's not there. It's like the answer to those, what we're looking for, comes when we raise our level of consciousness or raise our level of clarity. And then from that clear space, answers readily come forth. And it's realizing that the understanding this as clarity of mind, like how clear my head is one of the most useful guides, because there's a metaphor of a snow globe. Like when we really have a lot of noise in head, it's like a snow globe that's been shook up and the snow is covering the scenery and you just don't see as clearly. Now, I know that when I'm seeing much clearer, then I get fresh, new, helpful thinking. I'm naturally feeling calm, happy, in love with life. But to be in that space, the way that I get there is not by shaking up the snow globe. It's allowing it to settle, which it's that points to the amount of respect that I have for the current state of mind that I'm in. That if I'm feeling, say, it could be, anxious, or I might be a bit worried about something, or just not clear, it's seeing that that's not helpful to listen to. It's all made up. And I know that when my head clears, it will look different, you know? Or and it's like with anger or emotions. Like for example, you know, if we think that a circumstance in the world is making us feel a certain way, let's say we get an email that could be a bit edgy, you could say, and you read that and it looks like that's coming from the email, and you get emotional. You know, it's when you don't see that emotional heaviness, because as I like to think about it, how my emotions are, that's how clear my head is. Like the more emotional I am, the less clear I'm seeing things. Whereas the calmer I am, the more clearly I think. So it's that thing that realizing that emotional reactions of anger, like if I think the outside world needs to change for me to feel better, if I get an email like that, I'll try to wrestle and change and say things to get the other person to change before I can feel better. And that can lead to the wisdom we've all heard, and don't send that angry email. That is just a metaphor for when we're not feeling clear. That's a time to pause and reflect. So just waiting for clarity sometimes can be the best thing to do. Just letting that snow globe settle, and then we see what to do much clearer.
Yeah, I think I had I had a mini insight this week about speaking about this work, and it struck me. It's a bit like if knowing how to sail, which I don't, but but I believe if you know how to sail, that you can actually make progress into the wind, which would be impossible if you didn't understand the principles of sailing. And but if you have if you have that
I
understanding, you
I,
can.
lo- I lost you for a little second there. Could you just say
No, I
that
was
last?
saying I had an insight. This no, no, I had an insight about that if you know that how the principles help you is a bit like if you know how to sail, you can make progress into the wind. You can and if you know how these principles are operating, it can be enormously helpful, and it can enable you to see the facts of life, what really is truly happening, without the emotion, without the feeling. And it's not that you can instantly do that. It's not you can press a button and be there, but it's possible to be in a state of neutrality about just about anything. And I mean, I've had examples in my own life which have come to me, just, there's nothing to do with trying or effort or being good at this or anything like that. But I mean, one very powerful example was I had some really bizarre symptoms affecting my head and my spine and my eyes. And I was at, I went to A&E, and the doctor said to me, for some reason, it was just me and the doctor in this cubicle. And she said, "Well, we think you've had a brain hemorrhage, and once we've admitted you, we'll be doing a lumbar puncture to check, because you could still die." And then she walked out of the room. And I was a mother of young children at that point. I was there on my own, and I just went into a place of absolute clarity. Absolute clarity. It was astonishing, and in fact, all of those things I did not want to happen, but, brain hemorrhage, lumbar puncture, or admission to hospital even. But and they all did. I didn't have a brain hemorrhage, but it was just so interesting to me, because it was just that clarity just came upon me in the face of this potential diagnosis, which is possibly devastating, and I'm not saying that I would, if something similar happened today, that I would have the same response. I might be completely caught up in my feelings, but part of me would know that the two are separate. There's the medical investigation, and then there's my feelings about it, and it's so valuable to know that the feelings bit can collapse, that we can come back to neutrality with anything at all, big or small.
Yeah, beautiful, very powerful, and that that feeling of clarity. It's always within us where we are. That it's we take it with us. Like you mentioned, Mavis. You said that it's portable, which is is so cool that or one thought away, and that that realization that we have that going for us, and that there's always something helpful to come through. that can ground us and guide us, especially when we need it the most, that's hugely helpful and hugely um, practical. That there was a fun the one that came to me last night. That's it's often when we stop trying to figure it out, or sometimes when we can't, then our intuition and our wisdom comes through and guides us. Like, I was watching the Born Identity movie last night, which I hadn't seen for years, and the first part of it, Matt Damon's character Jason Bourne, he has amnesia. He can't remember who he is, and then he makes the point that it's like, I can't remember who I am. I can't really think, but I can do all these things. I know what to do here. I know how to tie knots. I know how to read maps, and all his, skills and faculties were there, and without the conscious mind interfering. And it's it. There's a similar thing when I play music, that when I'm in the moment on stage, I just see that it's not helpful to be engaging in the noise. And the more that I come fully present, the more that my wisdom guides me to play. And this can be like with another person I'm listening to and speaking with, that I'm just guided what to do. And there's this I sometimes call it the other guy, because when I'm in that space, I'm not thinking about what to do, but my hands are moving. and and I do the thing that's most responsive in the moment. And when I've reflected on that and said, well, that felt quite beautifully weird, but that feeling of being guided, and what happens, and it said, well, I'm using the things that I know, I'm using the musical tools and the words that I know, but it's not my intellect. It's like beneath that there's an intelligence that knows how to draw upon that better than me just trying to figure it out does.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yes, I have something like that when I'm if I used to be a glass artist, and when I'm doing glass, and I'm just completely in flow, and it's not the glass, it's just a place where I don't have a lot of thinking about having to work out, and just stuff, ideas just come and come and come, and I'm incredibly kind of happy and content, and I know it at the time. It's a wonderful sort of feeling, and I often ask people, especially if I'm working with a group. I might ask people, what do you love to do? What are you effortlessly good at? And it's not, it's never the thing, but people have their thing or things where they have that experience, and where they don't have a lot of thinking and judgment and so on around it. And it's an interesting way. It's an interesting route into what's already there.
Absolutely. And it's pointing people to that they have access to this that we are speaking about, that it's not something to necessarily learn as a new concept to then apply, but just ref- being a mirror to help point to that this is already happening. This is how the mind works. If we think it, we feel that. And are you seeing that playing out in your life? Like, have you noticed a time that the same situation was happening, and you started thinking about the situation, and you felt one way, then without the situation changing, you felt another way? Isn't that interesting? And then it's that there's an invitation to see, well, why is that? That all of our experience is coming from thought in the moment. And every single one of those feelings is safe to feel, and always a pointer to that deeper part of us that we can come through with wisdom, and we just see what to do, which is the most beautiful thing in the world when you experience it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And also so practical.
Absolutely, and I mean, and that practicality, I think, is very important in the coaching role. I mean, one of my teachers used an example which I've kind of purloined for myself. He said, "Our job is to be like game wardens." the stuff's all there already. But if you're not experienced, if you don't have this knowledge and training and experience, then you don't notice it. But as a coach, in the game warden role, what I'm doing is finding the evidence in the client's own life that where this is all already being has already been showing up regularly, but that we are not kind of conditioned or primed to notice and value insights. But almost everybody is having. I think everybody's having them all the time, and we're not we're not primed to notice that we're the creative of our experience and that there's an option. We're not primed to notice just how much creative genius is available to us, and how everybody solves problems. Everybody has solved every problem in their life up until now, at least to some extent. Everyone who's still alive is doing that, and but we kind of, we just sort of don't notice. These extraordinary things are showing up and showing up and showing up. And this work, I think, enables people to bring it together as part of a kind of cohesive whole. And that this extraordinary power is available to us. And I mean, that's what's so wonderful about our job, because we always know that it's not you or I putting this into people. It's already there. And our job is just to point it out. And another thing. Did you notice that one? Did you notice what you just said there? Mhm.
Yeah. I love the metaphor of it sharing this with people is like throwing cards through a fan that you just got to keep throwing those cards, and hopefully the fan gets slow enough that there's space for something to land. Then wow, just that one little insight, because it only takes one little realization that can then have like a domino knock-on effect on every area. It's like Sid's one was insecurity. And the way I would describe it is that I'm doing it to myself. Is that if I'm creating something that's unhelpful, it's like it just doesn't make sense to think into that, because it's when we have those low moods sometimes, it's that it's seeing that when I saw that when I have a low mood and think into it, that's what holds it in place more, and it's me making that up, and that's not helpful. Oh, then common sense, if I see that I can let go of that and allow my head to clear, then naturally I regain perspective. And the way that I'm wording that, that's not like that happens in my head every time I might be in a low mood, but just that silent realization that uh, that I don't need to jump on that train of thought. that when I see that, oh wait a minute, that's not, if I go on that train of thought, that's not going to be helpful. That split second pause of self awareness, brings us in the moment, and it can be that subtle. And the more that we see how helpful it is, the more that we look in this direction. And
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And I think there's a kind of cumulative effect that we're not always consciously aware of. That another of our colleagues coined the phrase, there's an effortless evolution. And if I come back to the sailing metaphor, if you know how sailboats work, you might sometimes make mistakes, you might sometimes not make great progress, and you might sometimes forget things, but over the piece, you're going to be sailing your boat in accordance with those principles. And it will become second nature. And there's something about that here, that it's not, this is not about, it's very different from positive psychology. It's not about putting on a happy face or refusing to think about anything difficult. It's something much subtler, but much more powerful and sustaining, I think, that we're talking about here.
and again, really practical. There's a what I heard when you were saying that was there's a real sense of resilience, knowing that going back to what we said, that we can't control what pops into our head, and we can't control that we're going to feel that. So that our internal weather, we can't really control our internal weather, but rather than being afraid of it, and we see that that's a changing weather pattern and will change all on its own, without having to do anything, that if our emotional weather is like the clouds, then at the backdrop, we are the sky, the one that's always there, that's that sense of being purely resilient, that no matter what emotion is, we're good, we're fine. It's like if it rains, we might get rained on and we'll feel it, but realizing that that core backdrop of presence and resilience, and knowing that whatever emotional experience that I have, beautiful and less preferable, let's say that I'm perfectly okay,
Yeah.
and that
You
I'm
cannot be
yeah,
broken by your feelings, and you cannot be diminished by them. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and the metaphor, I'll go there, but it's when I would listen to Sid at first, that he would in his old recordings, sometimes he would say things and I had no idea what he was talking about, and he would always talk about heaven and hell. Well, not always talk about, but sometimes he would make reference to that language, which is religious language. But the I really one of the most powerful insights recently would be that when we create any experience, you know, and the resilience part is really key, because if we create, let's just say, an inner hell, then the space in which we create all our experience. So if we call the hell an experience, if you think of heaven as a metaphor, as the pure space within which we create all experience, then heaven's bigger than hell. And we have the capacity to hold any experience, and know that in the midst of any experience we have perfect well-being that's always there, even in the midst of when it doesn't feel like it. That sense of we're always more okay than we think we are. You're always more okay than you think you are. And it's that, oh, it's safe to have any experience. And that might sound like just a nice word, but if you feel that in the midst of any experience, and that it's safe to feel it, then the difference is here with this understanding. It's like there's no urgency to go and fix it. Oh, I'm not feeling well. Let me go and fix it, which just creates more panic, which creates it in place. But just it's weather right now, but I'm good. And that it allows us to have much more of a graceful experience with everything, and it makes all of the beautiful feelings even easier to enjoy, because there's no resistance. Because what I would do a lot, and this is what a lot of the therapies and a lot of approaches do, is that when we get a feeling, often it can be a feeling that we don't like, and therefore this should be different, we think, and so we resist it. And that mental resistance is what creates the problem. And it's realizing that it's safe to feel and drop the resistance. Then the beauty of this self-correcting system is already doing its thing, and it's like a cut. For example, if we get a cut on our finger, okay, that there's a signal, a little pain signal that's like, oh, okay, there's a cut there, and we know that it will form a scab, and we know that it makes sense to not pick away at the scab because that will keep it in place longer. It's like when we have weather that's not the way that we want it, or a low mood or something like that, realizing that the mind is already doing what is required to clear that and heal that. But like the cut, we can know better to not pick away at that thing. And again, well, I wasn't taught that originally, and I mean that what I just explained, that was something that just popped into my head. But really, it's those little realizations that you have, or anyone listening have. Like, it's not just these words, oh, I've got to remember that the next time I'm in a low mood. It's when you just get a glimpse of, I'm okay. that, that we can orient ourselves more and more of the time from there, which is what a lot of people call grounding in this understanding. That, again, it's so practical. It enables us to do a lot more in the world as well, and just show up better and have more
Yeah.
fun too.
Well, listen, very cool, and I can't believe this. The time has just absolutely flown by. We're coming sort of towards the end of our time. Um, Now, if people want to get in touch with you, is it purely musicians that you work with, or how should people go about that, or through your podcast?
Sure. Well, it's well, I work with a variety of people. Yes, musicians. I've got a lot of experience working with thousands of students through the year, but also having these kind of conversations and also creating things with other people as well. So people, creatives, entrepreneurs also. It varies, but the best place to find out more about me and what I do is currently housed on my site windsordrums.com. That's as is, which has got links to all of my um, contact information, profiles, the Groove Guru podcast, also the some of my courses as well. That I recently just created a new one. It was called Back to Clarity. That uh, how to get back in balance when you're caught in thought, which was a spontaneous thing that emerged through me in a recent tour that I was doing earlier this year. But windsordrums.com, you can find a way to contact me there.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Windsor. I really appreciate you making the time, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, and likewise, Christian.